We're on the third video for introducing portraiture using mainly line. Okay, so we are about to head to the mouth. So at the end of the last video, I actually went ahead and I kind of erased our underdrawing for the mouth a little bit. I kind of showed two different ways to do this. I showed first just kind of an oval and then kind of a triangle, and that triangle should go to about halfway across the eye, so like straight down from there. And then at a certain point I also sort of split that in two. So if you had either of those, you were correct. But yes, I'm going to start by erasing them. So basically in the center of this, if you did have a line through this, we've got kind of a bottom lip and a top lip, so that line through the center would be the separation. You want the bottom lip to be a little bit larger from top to bottom than the top lip. The top lip is usually a little thinner. Not always. So you can certainly look at your reference or in the mirror, but usually. Okay, so I'm going to start in the center, and I'm going to give a little dip to that center, and then, so almost like at the very bottom of like a little circle. And then I'm going to come kind of out like a little hill, and then basically flat or angling down a little bit to that corner. So, and when I say that corner, I mean where we had our underdrawing end. Okay, so that's where we're going. And now over here again, we've got sort of like a little hill, and then just kind of angling down to here. If you want your person to be smiling a little bit, which I kind of recommend, just a little smile, then you can kind of turn that up a little bit at the end. We're not doing like a big, full, open, cheesy grin for several reasons, one of which being that it just gets more complicated. So we're just going to keep it simple. But you'll often see sort of an archaic smile, so just a little smile in a lot of portraiture anyway. So something like this, where it's not a big cheesy grin, but just a little smile. All right, so now for this top lip, we're going to keep it light. A lot of what you see with mouths tends to be kind of soft edges. See all these soft edges? Maybe more shaded than hard lines. So keep this light. You're going to have a little bit of a dip here. So kind of echoing this curve a little bit of a dip. And a little hill on each side. And then look at the curve of the lip. When I'm looking at myself in this photo, it's kind of curving down a little. And it doesn't go all the way out to here. It kind of like meets a little bit before here, and then we just have the little corner out here. But your lips may be different, so if you want to look at yourself in the mirror or your own photo and you want to draw it slightly differently, that's fine, because you see it a little bit differently, then I trust that. And you can ask if it seems wrong when you do it. You can try to troubleshoot that. All right, and then on the bottom here, again, we want the bottom lip to be a little bit fuller. So make sure that's a little farther from here than the top one. And you're going to make it fairly flat in the middle. And then kind of curve up. And just sort of suggest that it's going to attach. So just like up here, remember how I did not attach that part of the nostril over? Same thing here. I'm not going to fully attach it. And again, it might not even look like it would go all the way out to here. It might look like, oh, maybe it would go here if it did attach. And see how this is not like a totally smiley sort of curve. This is, when I say smiley, what I mean by that, it's not like an arc. you may see a little bit, like it's a little bit curved here, but it's not, it's not like just like a rainbow or something. It's a little bit flatter, so a little flat. So I'm doing it a little bit generically. It's not exactly how I'm seeing my mouth. If I were going to make it more like my mouth, I might have it even a little bit narrower, but that'll work for now. There is typically a lot of shading with the mouth. So if we were going to shade, I would add a little bit of shading here. I'd add a little bit of shading here. I'd add some shading down here. And notice you've got these lines, these texture lines. So really, really lightly, you could add a little bit of suggestion of that if you wanted to develop this more. Just, again, keep them really, really light, and they're sort of in the context of this larger shadow. So I know we're not really shading here, but I'm just kind of giving you a little bit of a hint. A lot of times to hear this top lip, I kind of drew it as a line, but it may, you know, it'll honestly maybe look a little bit better, more as if it's just sort of like part of that shadow. But if you are shading a little bit like I am, just like I'm just doing really rough shading, notice how I leave it a little open at the center. So that makes it look curved. So this center part looks like it's coming at you a little more, and same for down here. All right, one part we didn't do, and I'm going to do, you could do this as like a couple of lines in here. This is the little divot underneath the nose. But I might recommend, instead of a line, just sort of like this light sort of shading right there. That's even probably too dark. Maybe just do like a little dip here, and then you can just kind of do a little shading. All right, so we're pretty much done with this area. I'm going to erase these lines around the mouth. I'm going to erase these lines that were coming down from the eyeballs. Erase, erase, erase. You know what, you might as well just go ahead, and I'm going to erase these side planes of the face. Now notice I'm using my kneaded eraser, this gray squishy one, which I highly recommend because you'll still see those lines a little bit. And you do kind of want to see those lines a little bit. All right, so we're going to add a little bit in, instead of doing that full-on oval or circle, we're just going to do a little suggestion of like the top of that. So again, almost a little more like shading than a line. And then at the bottom, this was just looking a little fuzzy, so I'm just going to redraw. So all this was, we just have our chin here. All right, and that may be another place where we've already got the chin here, but that might be another place to, again, just sort of suggest a little bit of a shadow there. So we're not going to add full-on shading, but I'll just suggest a little bit there. All right, so we're getting pretty far. One area we have not done is the ears. They're a little bit hard to see in my photo of myself because my hair gets in the way a little bit. But we can look at this guy. This guy has very pronounced ears. Very, I don't know how to say that. Let's see if I can find another reference. Okay, so we've got a second ear here. It's just a little less pronounced. So basically, again, we're going to start the same way that we have in the past. We're going to actually erase the underdrawing. I'm going to shape the outside of the ear so it sticks out a little further at the top. And with both of these, this isn't always the case, but with both of these, we sort of have that top part sticking out maybe just a little bit, and then it kind of comes out a little bit, and we've got that bottom part of the earlobe. Maybe a little long. Okay, so basic shape we had before, but with a little bit more definition there. All right, and then basically when we look at the ear from the side, we kind of have this going on. Oops. All right, and then we basically have kind of this happening. All right, so when we look at that from the side, that top part, which is just kind of round, we see it kind of like an ellipse, kind of like this, and we'll see that part kind of cross that part a little bit. So we'll start that up here, kind of have that angle up, and kind of, again, doesn't attach, but it looks like it's going to head toward that way. And then this part come down, and we don't have to really continue that, we just do it a little bit. A lot of times here you will see a little suggestion of this part of the ear coming out and maybe in front. And then down here we kind of see this angle and then just coming like so. Now a lot of times this guy doesn't have any hair to get in the way, so we just kind of see the cheekbone jutting out there a little bit. But if the person does have even really short hair, you'll see a little bit of the hair there. You might see a little tuft of hair if the person has longer hair. So I do recommend putting in here a little bit of hair just sticking out. So this is coming out from the side of the head. So it's hiding a little bit of that midsection of the ear. So I wasn't really trying to shade that, it just sort of happened, but if we had a cleaner line here and a clean, that's kind of what I'm adding there. And that ends up being maybe a little bit of space here between the hairline as well. Okay, so same thing over here. I'm just replacing that basic shape with one where, okay, we said that top part might stick out a little, so maybe not as much as it does for that guy, because again, his ears are very kind of pronounced. His whole face is very pronounced with his shapes, and his ears are no exception. All right, but maybe just sticking up a little bit there, and then we've got that line kind of coming up. And then you can kind of see over here a little bit of that curving in. We might see again this center part kind of sticking out. And then this part here just kind of making this little curve like so. And again, so with this guy, you can see so much detail in his ear. You might see, oh, okay, there's like this little line here. But again, for most people, you won't see that. Instead, what you'll see, and I'm just going to erase a little bit here, is that they just have like a little tuft of hair. So I'm just adding that little shape there. This is a part where you can see on these models that you might have this cheekbone jutting out a little bit here. So kind of, you can really see it on this side, kind of coming out a little bit. So you can see that on some of our other models. And you might see this lower part underneath the cheekbone. So here's the cheekbone. You might see this kind of coming in a little bit. So you won't see that on everybody. With some people, it'll just kind of be more of a line. But if you do see that a little bit, you would just erase a little and kind of bring out that curve out and then maybe in a little bit. So now I have this part just kind of coming out. And you saw it was so small. So I brought it in a little here, out a little bit, and then back in. And then this is essentially coming in front, and this is then behind it a little bit. So if you see that, but you don't always see it. Sometimes it's just one kind of line or curve. So over here, you might see that kind of come in a little, out a little, and then just kind of angle in a little bit there. So, and then that puts this part of the line behind it. So again, just depends on how much the cheekbones stick out on the model you're looking at. All right, and that kind of brings me to this next part where we're looking at the cheekbones. So we'd had this sort of line on here, So you can, you might add a little bit of shading kind of coming into there. Or just having sort of this ghost of this shadow there might be enough. But all that was just showing was kind of that little bit of shading there. Sorry, my underdrawing is sticking out a little bit still. This would be another place, if you do have the cheekbones a little more prominent, you could add a little bit of shading underneath that cheekbone. Here, again, we see that sticking out a little bit, so you might see that. This guy, you very much see that facial structure, but on this person and on my photos, you don't see that as much. I guess you maybe see it a little bit right there. So you can try to erase that more, or you can kind of make it sort of a little bit shaded. Another place where you might see a little bit of shading is in this area, so there's sort of this mouth muscle. You can usually see it, you can definitely see it on this guy. You can see his mouth muscle here and here. You can see a little bit under here. You can usually see that on me pretty well. So mouth muscle a little bit at the top, definitely a little bit at the bottom. And this one, a little bit there. So you could add a little bit, so again, just maybe a little bit of shading in here, maybe a little bit of shading in here. So this is just, the suggestion of a little line or what have you. If you want to show a little bit of these kind of smile lines or dimples, you can put that, oops, I somehow erased a little bit of my mouth there. So you could put just a little bit of a hint of that here. But again, you don't want necessarily any of these details to be too dark or anything like that, or they could just look like wrinkles or just look a little odd. If in doubt, if you're wondering why your portrait looks odd, it's probably that you made some of the things that should have been light or soft lines, you probably made them really dark and heavy, and that's why your person looks old or weird or whatever. I'm just getting rid of some of these additional lines. If you are drawing a male, you might see, I can't really see it on here. Let's see. I was going to say you'd see the Adam's apple, maybe some of these shoulder guys, maybe we can see it. Yeah, you can kind of see it on this guy. So if I wanted to make this a male, I would just add a little bit of light shading around there, just to suggest an Adam's apple. If you are drawing someone and the shirt line is low enough, you might see a little bit of the collarbone. So if you do see that, that might be here. You would kind of see a tendon, and then this sort of hollow part. So you can put that there. We will kind of give this clothes really quickly. So to give this clothes, this is a little dark, so it's hard to see, but see how that's wrapping around there? That's what you want no matter what kind of neckline. Okay, so this guy has a simple neckline, easier to see. So you could put this lower if you want to make this a little bit of a lower neckline. You could put it up here even if you want to make it more of like a t-shirt. So we're going to make this little curve. So coming around and over top. So that's the inside, just there. Okay, now we're going to give that a little bit of space, kind of come like that. Make that a little bit of like a bump there to give that sort of feeling of fabric, just like you kind of see there. And then that's going to curve over. All right, and then we would just attach that to the other side. So I'll just make mine just low enough that you can kind of see the collarbone there, since I already put in the collarbone. And I would just curve that around. This does not have to be perfectly symmetrical, since it's, it's fabric. it's going to move, shift. Okay, so just working on that neck a little bit. All right, but then when I get over here, again, similar thing, just going to curve it up and over and give that just a little space and a little lift to that fabric. So notice how I'm doing that just a little bit above where the shoulders were, and then that curves and connects. So the fabric sits a little bit above the shoulders, so you could even kind of have this dip down and up. If you are going to do the shoulders, you might add in, say, a seam here, maybe a seam here. So I'm having this kind of come up a little bit. Okay. And then I would erase the original line of the shoulder before we put in fabric. And then maybe we might have a little bit of a lift here. Maybe there's a seam there. And maybe you have a little bit of a seam there, like this guy does here. And you can have that come over and connect. And if you want to make this look even more 3D, again, you can put in sort of a little shadow, a little lift at each of these areas just to kind of show how that connects. And then you could do kind of a similar thing over here. Had all these sketchy lines over here anyway, so. All right, and then we could have this again be maybe where that fabric is creating a little bit of a seam. And don't make this stuff too perfect. So if you can see something like this, you might see, oh, maybe there's a little wrinkle that creates a little bump. So if you can include stuff like that, if you can observe it, that's really best because it'll make it look more real if you can kind of find a photo or look in the mirror and see it. But yeah, having those little like bumps and that kind of thing, just not having too perfect can actually really help make it look real. So again, maybe something like that. We could add something like this. Okay, so notice how all of these are maybe just a little sketchy. They're just sort of hinting at like shadow rather than just like this hard line because they'd be these little forms. All right, final thing we have here that we could add to this. Right now, it's like I've got this like crew cut. So if you do have very, very short hair, then basically, hey, I basically got it. But basically, let's give this, I don't know, someone else's hair. Whoever's hair you're going to draw, you would start with the outline. So if I were going to draw this guy's hair, I would create this outline. And so this part on top might be, you know, up here. And then it would get really close to his head. You know, and that might be the basic shape of the hair. And then you would see, oh, okay, we've got sort of this form. So you might say, oh, okay, then I'm going to add this form in here. So I'm getting rid of the head because the hair is coming in on top of that. You don't see the skull. Okay, so here you would sort of see, oh, okay, there's this form, and that kind of creates this shape. So you're looking for the shape, then you're looking for the form, and finally the texture. So to do this hairline, his hairline has a little bit of like a rise and then a fall. You call that a widow's peak, and then up a little bit, and then the edges of the hairline are pretty much right. People always ask about, well, how do I make the hairline look real? Again, it's usually just that you're drawing it too much of a perfect line. If you make it just a little sketchy, that suggests the texture of hair. So if I zoom in, that's where your hair is growing from. So a little bit of that line. And then the rest, a lot of the rest of this is with shading. So if I were really doing this and shading this whole thing, I might add some shading next. So Notice here we've got darker closer to the hairline, lighter where it's sort of popping out or curving out, and then darker near the edges. I would use the same technique here. All right, so I might just add a little bit of shading, let's say around here. A little shading up here. So you do not have to do all this shading, but it does help. So I'm just really, luckily I have this sort of dirty blending tool there. Graphite stick was actually a bit dark. But that dirty blending tool, that kind of gives you really, really quickly that hair, that shaded feel. Again, I'm gonna put this in a little bit darker. Notice how this outside form, again, keeping it a little bit rough, that's gonna give it more of that feeling that it's hair. So I'm doing that texture with like the edges. And if you can figure out what direction the hair is going, that helps. Oop. What happened there? So now we can see that a little bit. You can see over here, we've got like some actual just little lines sticking out. And then here, just maybe really, really small little lines to kind of show where this kind of goes down. So basically like a buzz cut almost here behind the ear. All right, so, and then the final part, and this is where people go wrong. So remember, our steps were the basic shape around the edges, then thinking about the forms. So we saw we had sort of this form. That was this whole top part. And we saw how the form then kind of made these different shapes at it. Oops, I just realized I made this form or shape maybe a little off. This part is actually a little further down. Okay, so don't be afraid to revise when you see something that's off. Still probably a little bit off, but we'll just keep moving. Then a little bit of shading. You could skip the shading. But what you don't want to do is try to draw every single little line. You want to notice what direction the hair grows and just add some lines for texture. And I'll make these a little darker so hopefully you can see them a little better. Here we go, 4B. So see how I'm just starting at that edge there where the hair is growing from, and I'm just trying to follow the direction of the form, but I'm not drawing every single little line. I'm just kind of adding a suggestion. And then it kind of switches direction, and again, I'm not doing every single line. I'm just kind of suggesting that form. You could do a little bit up here too, especially if you didn't shade. All right. Around these edges, again, if you want to add a little more texture, it's just little hairs, little lines for those little hairs. Curly hair, you have, more curly lines. So that's often when people then start getting into the nitty-gritty of, oh, how do I draw my hair? And it becomes a whole big thing. And I sometimes do many, many tutorials. Okay, so you can see I've got some of these different sort of examples, and so I'll put some different examples in and help you guys with some of these different types of hairstyles. But there we have it. We basically have finished our tutorial. So, all right, now you know the basics of drawing a human being. Voila. We are all finished, but yeah, leave these little things over here. That way I can see that you did what you were supposed to do. I'll have you take a photo actually halfway through, so I can see the whole under drawing. At this point, I guess what I would be doing would also be revising. I think the eyes actually turned out a little bit, not totally implausible, but I might be saying, oh, you know what, actually those should be a little bit smaller. So this might be the time that you notice things that maybe are just a little bit off, and you might be changing some of those things. But there we go. Notice too, since I did just make those little changes, notice how small those were. That's usually the thing, that if you see something that looks off, you may think it's a big change, and it's actually just sort of that like tiny little, like a millimeter. So that's my overall tip for portraits. The only thing I might add here, since I did a little bit of shading, you could add a little bit of shading sort of toward the edges of some of these forms, a little bit underneath here. So just a little bit in there. So right underneath the chin and the jaw, that's often a place where you would have a little bit of shading. A lot of times here you may have noticed there's sort of like tendons in the neck, so you might have a little bit of shading. You might have a little bit of shading here, sort of right underneath, next to, and coming from the collar. And just in general, if you are trying to add a little bit of shading to not make this look just kind of like blank, think sort of shading sort of curving around the edges of forms, just to give it a hint. Yeah. If you are adding shading, just make sure that it's not too overwhelming, and that it kind of goes and gives a little bit of a gradation. And you can use lines for this. I think that's a place where, hey, there's a lot more detail in a human than in a box or in a sphere. So in this case, you do need to have lines to capture all that detail. Yeah, so we can discuss that more in class as well. I realized actually I added a little shading down here, and I didn't really add it in other places. If you are adding a little bit of shading, another really important place to add that to would be here in like the eye sockets. You would also want, again, like a little bit around sort of just like the edges of the face. So you don't want to blend away anything really important, but I'm just using my blending tool in this case. It's dirty already. Here and here, we've got sort of like a bone here. So if you do here and here, you're going to kind of capture how this part of the bone lifts. Right between the eyes, again, it kind of goes in a little bit. And you might sometimes see a little bit right above the brow line, because the brow bone sort of juts out a little bit. A little bit in here, a little bit in here. And underneath the nose is actually a really important part. That might be hard to do without smudging what I've done. But sort of bottom of the nose and underneath the nose and sort of around there. Making sure that you have gotten rid of, I think I forgot to get rid of some of that center line. So I made sure I did that. I think I did that off camera though. Any other guidelines, make sure you get rid of those. I think I have a few around here. And again, if any of this sort of makes it look a little bit odd, probably just a little too much. One part too, if you are adding shading, just a hint of shading here, not a lot. If you shade in that whole area really evenly, it's going to look like a pig nose. And then if you did add a little bit of shading down here, chances are you blended away some of the definition. So go back in and make sure that you give that a little more definition. So yeah, you might find you have a little bit here, a little bit here, and then basically right along where you had that line earlier. So we had those lines. Now again, if it's looking a little too much, looking just like, oh, it's a little bit dirty, go into any parts like the cheekbones stick out, so you can make those a little lighter. And you can just soften up the chin sticks out a little. You know, if it's a little bit too much, just erase a little bit. But that way you kind of have a little bit of just a hint of shading without having done sort of full-on shading. This also curves back a little bit right there. Right there where we had kind of said we had a line, but it might really be more of a shadow. All right, so there you go, a hint of some shading.